also think we can start with the webinar for today. So I'm really happy to welcome you on behalf of the organizing committee of this event. So this fall webinar is under the title Shaping and Provisioning Systems for Social Ecological Transformation, Decent Care for All Within Planetary Boundaries. It is organized by my colleagues Julia Fankhauser, Corinna Dengler, and myself. Today we are meeting for the second webinar under the title Transition Towards Caring Society. And as you can see, this is the second of 4 seminars played in the row. Now I will already start screen sharing because I will send you also some info into the chat. Yes, I'm really happy to welcome all of you. Corinna Dengler and Julia Fankhauser are affiliated to the Vienna University of Economics, my co-organizers, and they are working at the Institute of Multi-Level Governments and Development. And Julia Fankhauser is also the coordinator of the International Karl Polanyi Society in Vienna. I am Fabienne Décieux, and I'm a member of the Department of Sociology at the University of Vienna. So as you can see, also the organizing committee is interdisciplinary, and you will see also our discussions today are interdisciplinary. And we are really looking forward to today's webinar, which is hosted by the International Karl Polanyi Society and funded by the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, Brussels. Thus, as I said before, and as you have seen on the screen, the fall seminar series started in September, and today we are hosting the second webinar. To all of you who might have missed the first one and who are interested to getting to know about what we have discussed last time, the video will be released soon on the homepage of the International Karl Polanyi Society. And if you want to stay updated on our activities, because I'm also a member of the board of the International Karl Polanyi Society, I will post the link for registration of the newsletter. They are not too many, don't worry, but you will be also informed about the recordings of today and of the 2 upcoming seminars, webinars, but also on the other topics. The second webinar, the first webinar was on the topic Towards a Caring Economy, Netzwerk für Vorsorgendes Wirtschaften meets Foundational Economy. And as I said before, you can rewatch it. You can watch the recording online in a few days. So today we will discuss the topic Transition Towards Caring Society, and I'm really happy to welcome our distinguished speakers, who most of you already know for sure, but nevertheless, I will shortly introduce them in an alphabetic order. Funnily, I will start with Birgit Sauer, although it is an alphabetic order, not too often, I think. Birgit Sauer is Professor Emerita of Political Science at the University of Vienna. She works on state theory, democracy with a feminist perspective, and on right-wing populism and gender. As you can see, I will keep it short. Merle Schulken is the second one in the alphabetic order. And Merle is our lifesaver today. So I have to tell that because, as you might have noticed, she isn't Nathan Barlow, and she filled in because Nathan sadly is ill. And today she agreed to come and to join us. So thank you very much for that again. Merle is currently stationed at the University of Massachusetts, Amsterdam, at the College of Social and Behavioral Science in the Department of Economics as a PhD student, and she's a part of the Degrwth and Strategy editorial team. Third, we have Barbara Thiessen. She is a professor in education science, counseling, and gender at Bielefeld University, Germany. Her research focus is on counseling and gender, care theory, democracies, and social justice, doing family. and caring communities. And she's a founding member of Care macht mehr, as a network some of the German-speaking members here might know. I hope so, at least. And we have Hanna Völkle. She researches the feminist ecological economies of time and is a PhD student at the University of Fechter. She works as a social scientist and research associate for the Harriet Taylor Mill Institute for Economics and Gender Studies at the Berlin School of Economics and Law. And she's an expert in the field of diversity, gender equality, and digital technology. So as you can see, we can be really happy to have such a great round of experts speaking to us today. And as I said before, we have a webinar series, so we will pick up on things we already elaborated. I will try to connect some things later in the discussion to the first session, but our speakers will address questions of care. In the first webinar, we already elaborated the relevance of care for addressing the ecological crisis from different perspectives, which led to a fruitful discussion, which illustrated the commonalities, but also the differences between vorsorgendes Wirtschaften and the foundational economy. E.g., in the strengths, we found differences. The strengths of the vorsorgendes Wirtschaften network is, for example, the feminist approach, which gives certain insights into the questions of economy and ecological change and care. Or the concrete political demands of the foundational economy was one of the points we discussed as one of the strengths of this network. Today's webinar will continue to discuss on care and social ecological transformation from an interdisciplinarity perspective, but a different perspective than we did last time. The title, Transition Towards a Caring Society, is promising, and we will discuss the topic starting with an input of Barbara Thiessen on the ideas of a caring society. During the times of increasing right-wing populism, ideas of caring societies are contested, and Birgit Sauer will shed a light on this by giving us insights on her field work and her findings in right-wing versions of caring societies, but also in visions of a caring democracy. Afterwards, Hanna Völkle will pick up the question of care and carelessness, including an ecological perspective and progressive visions. Last but not least, Merle will talk about questions how different forms of power restrict or facilitate the transition towards a caring society or a changing society, and will embed that in societal context as well as economic context and on a structural level. Afterwards, the speakers will have the possibility to react to the inputs of each other, and then we will finally open the floor also for questions of the audience. So now to the interesting part, and I would like to ask Barbara to share her screen and to give us her input. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation to this very interesting webinar. I want to start with my input, strategies, and traps on the way to a caring society in 4 steps. The first thing is the complexity of care crisis, which is the starting point. Care crisis is based on the systematic ignorance of Western capitalist economies towards the need of care. And when we look on unpaid care, we see in the private sphere, which is a feminized domain, this has become more demanding, but insecure due to increasing paid work of women. And on the side of the care professions, we see this is an underpaid and overburdened area. The second point is crisis affects all spheres, which are education, nursing, social work, paid and unpaid support, but they are approached isolated from each other. And the third point is care crisis intermerged and cumulated with other critical phenomena for example, the rising pressure through neoliberal developments, climate change, and the renewal of right-wing. And we are discussing this today also. So what could be strategies towards a caring society? A first idea is implementing care mainstreaming, so that in every political discussion, we should think about the care issues. The second point is improving working conditions in the field of care. This is not only an adequate payment, but also better conception possibilities for professional care work, so that those who are in the fields of care work can prevent themselves from moral injury. And caring communities is also an important point we should come to. That means supporting caring neighborhoods based on urban and local planning, housing policies, and also inclusive community work and participation opportunities. Some ideas what caring communities could be. Neighborhoods are important resources for everyday life, but they cannot fill in the blanks of the welfare state continuously. So the support structures are needed as living hoops. For example, social workers can be connect and strengthen the contributions of volunteers. They can offer contact points, neighborhood cafes, for example. But we also need a smart combination of formal, informal, and private care. For example, social services should also support and provide information to people who are caring for and supporting others in families, in the neighborhood. And we need embedded participation models in urban and regional planning for diverse and inclusive concept. So for all this, we need a new time policy, which means binding time options for care in every day, but also during the life course. And therefore, Karin Jutschig and Ulrich Mückenberger had the idea of the option time model, which means the idea of breathing life courses, the idea to have an option time budget about 9 years in everybody's long working time, which always is getting longer and longer, up to 70 years or something like that. The working time can be interrupted or reduced, 6 years for care time budget, and additional 2 years for vocational training, and 1 year for self-care. I can explain it a little bit more in our discussion. To look on risk and traps, that means that volunteering could be a cheap substitute for professional work. Another risk is an ongoing feminization of care in the social space, even when it's volunteering work. And we should look on the lack of control over abusive and violating or overburdening care arrangements, because care is not good. It also can be a starting point for violence. So the ignorance towards a precarious employment and care migration is also a trap. And at least the segregation of caring communities to exclusive, inward-looking, self-lucky communities rejecting for the foreign and the other. This also would be a lack of social rights. So to sum it up, we need social and gender justice in regarding of caring societies. What we are seeing is that care is on the agenda, but more in a rhetoric than in politics. So we have an ongoing activities of care initiatives all over Europe and all over the world, but we still are not successful in convincing the public debates that all these care crisis phenomena are strongly interconnected and that economy has to acknowledge care as relevant. And the interest in changing irregular precarious employment is marginal because we all profit from it. It's a cheap care. Also problematic is that caring communities are starting at the municipal level, but here we see considerable underfunding. The restructuring of social security and time structures requires considerable political. And so it's not enough to have a proclamation of the European pillar of social rights when they don't come to reality. What we need is that care is not an incident, but the new normal in everyday individual life and in social political conception. So we need the care to write for others and also the right to be cared for. So that's all for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the most interesting insights you gave us. It was a broad overview, which was perfect, like to getting into the topic. Now I would like to ask Birgit to give us her insights.
Yeah, also from my side, good evening, and thanks so much for inviting me to this webinar, and also thanks so much to Barbara, because she laid the ground, I think, for so many discussions. So my perspective is on, let's say, recent political developments, and I have to admit that I do not have a strategy how to move towards a caring society, but maybe we can put this strategy together later. And my starting point for this tonight's intervention is the masculinism, how I would label it, is of new right, authoritarian conjunctures. And I studied this conjuncture for Austria and for Germany, but I think it's visible also in other contexts. And this masculinist conjuncture, and I use the concept of conjuncture by Stuart Hall, not the economic conjuncture concept. And this masculinist conjuncture builds on rather contradictory developments of the last years, of the last 30 years, which we could label neoliberal developments, which also aggravated these care crises. So, and these neoliberal contradictions include, well, as Barbara already said, a care crisis, but also growing precarity and insecurity, not only of care workers, but also of especially male labor. Another development of the last 30 years is the integration, although precarious integration of women into the labor market, and thus the partial erosion of the male breadwinner model, and also a partial erosion of traditional gender roles within families, but also on workplace, especially through affirmative action. And the last contradictory development is what I would label a mobilization, a global mobilization to migration. So, and the authoritarian right now tries to exploit these contradictory developments of the last 30 years by mobilizing one coherent narrative. And what they do is to resignify these neoliberal developments and precarization as a crisis of masculinity. And what these right-wing actors do is that they promise to solve this crisis of masculinity and to re-sovereignize masculinity, meaning to re-establish traditional gender roles, a traditional gendered division of labor. And in my studies, I found what I would label something like masculinist identity politics. So the right promises, as I said, to reestablish strong, aggressive masculinity, non-empathic sort of soldier masculinity. And this sort of autonomous, re-sovereignized masculinity denies care for others. And it is based on the idea of an independent, autonomous male subject, which isn't in need of care, and of course, which doesn't want or doesn't have to give care. However, this masculinist identity politics, on the other hand, promises to reestablish the traditional family. And in this family, which is not only the basis for the nation and the state, but also this family is a sphere of love and care. So, and this is also, of course, contradictory, but women are constructed in this right-wing discourse, of course, as caregivers for all family members, including for this allegedly independent man. And the authoritarian right uses rather effective antagonistic strategies to create this crisis of masculinity and then to promise solutions. Right-wing strategies include a rather moralistic mobilization of good versus bad, of hate and anger against the political elites, but also of anger against those depicted as others. So this antagonistic effective strategy is always connected to inequality, those who should be excluded, the others. It's connected to exclusion and to the severe forms of othering. So these are my research results very briefly. And now I thought, well, what can I contribute to, let's say, overcome this masculinist, careless conjuncture? And what do we need to get towards a more egalitarian and caring conjuncture? And I think there we have to deal especially with the issue of care and carelessness, and also with the issue of emotion and affect. So because it's not only the right-wingers that have the right to use emotion and affect in the political space, but I think the political space itself is rather emotionally and affectively laden, and also an emancipatory strategy for a caring society should realize and acknowledge this emotionality and affectivity of the political space. So that's why I thought, well, to overcome this masculinist conjuncture, societies should move towards what I would label now as an effective, caring democracy. And this is a twofold concept, I would say. First of all, it's a sort of critical lens to analyze what is going on in liberal democracies, what is the problem, the contradictions within liberal democracies, which are now exploited by radical right-wing actors. And the second dimension is that it could also be a normative concept of a caring and effective democracy. And I'm, of course, not the first one to develop something like this. I very much rely on Joan Tronto's very early notion of a care democracy. I think this care and effective democracy should be based on two ideas or two moves, I could say. The first idea is that we have to deconstruct the notion of the liberal subject. And this liberal subject is, since the Enlightenment, constructed as a male, sovereign, independent, relationless subject. And I think we have to deconstruct or even destroy this idea of liberal democracies. And we have to see that all people are needy, are vulnerable, are dependent on others, and that this dependency is nothing that is per se bad, but it's also not per se good, because we know that dependency might also develop into domination, into exploitation, into violence. This is also what Barbara pointed out. But I think we have to take this contradictory notion of relatedness, of caring, into consideration, and a real democracy has to deal with this, has to develop strategies and mechanisms so that dependency and care isn't only exploitable, but also has an emancipatory or could be the starting point for emancipatory politics. So, and the second dimension I would like to stress is that democracy is always a struggle. So it's always a process. And it's always a struggle over the everyday life of people. It's a struggle over care. It's a struggle also, of course, over other dimensions of work. So, and in these, and therefore these struggles, they are always emotional, they are always affected. And that's why I say democracy is per se effective and emotional. And we should also, from this side, more from the affective side, see that affective modes of subjectivation, of struggles over meaning, of struggles how we want to live together, how we want to receive care, and how we want to give care, that this is the, let's say, at the center of the political and at the center of the democratic. But to move towards such a sensitivity for care and affect and emotion in democracy, we need a totally different time idea. This is also what Barbara already referred to. I think this idea of democracy needs a lot of time. And of course, it needs space, and it needs institutions. It needs institutions to reflect on affectivity, for instance, to reflect on one's own emotions and affects, where they come from, why one feels hurt, why one wants to hurt the other, why one wants to exclude the other. All these are emotions, I think, for which we need time and institutions to think about. I think this could be one way to establish these institutions, and this could be rather quite similar with what Barbara already suggested. This could be institutions in the neighborhood, but this could also be time at work, at school, wherever people are and wherever they are, with their relatedness, with their anger, with their fear, but also with their idea of belonging and want to belong. So maybe this is, I stop here and when we can discuss this further. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very interesting insights. Again, and I think it is perfect that Barbara and Birgit already had some commonalities, but also differences, and they are also already pointing to the question of time. I hope that's good for you also, Hanna, and I would like to ask you to give your input now.
Yeah, thank you. I also took some notes, especially on the option time model and the ideas that Birgit just formulated on temporal needs. And I just would like to thank you once again to invite me to this very interesting webinar. And I would now like introduce myself content-wise. My research topic is the economy of time, and especially time politics of caring societies, or as I call it, caring times. Now, what does that mean? In general, it addresses the necessity to focus on more than labor-based working time. So as you just mentioned, we do have, like, for example, time-based surveys. We do know the gender care gap, for example, and we do know this quantitative amount of temporal differences. And caring times express the need to A, broaden the definition of work, including care work, unpaid care work, and B, explores temporal needs and structures that lead beyond man-made growth paradigmatic instruments as clock time. So to open up the spectrum of times to make it think and thus debatable in effective democracies, for example, an ecofeminist perspective on the temporal dimension and dynamics of social and ecological reproduction processes is needed. This perspective, this ecofeminist perspective, explores and revisibilizes time and temporal needs, which can hardly be tracked, measured by man-made instruments as clocks. And there's an exclamation mark, like brainwise, that you have to think now. This does not mean that we do not need research on, for example, as I already mentioned, the gender care gap or time use surveys. It leads us rather beyond those quantitative results and realities. I give you a few examples. Even though humans have developed multiple ways to fasten everyday life, there remain some points of everydayness, referring to Henri Lefebvre, that can hardly be fastened. Have you ever tried to be a listening friend faster when your loved ones need someone who cares? Or even though we could imagine it, would the temporal quality change if we read a bedtime story on multiple speed? Time has several interpersonal dynamics. It connects, it sustains human relationships, collectives, and has dynamics of communities. So time is embodied, as Birgit also mentioned already. The same holds true for the ecological reproduction, and I hope we will talk about that later on. Barbara Adam, for example, developed the concept of timescapes. As the name tells, this temporal concept is linked to the ecological embeddedness of time. As landscapes such as mountains or seas, timescapes reminds us of the vibrant connection of past, present, and future. At the same time, it is a striking reminder of planetary boundaries, of ecological limits that might lead beyond humans' capacity to grasp their temporal dimension. What I'm saying is, if we want to initiate a transition towards a caring society, we need to implement caring times and spaces, which allow for social and ecological reproduction. A useful concept, therefore, could be the 4-in-1 perspective of Frigga Haug. You might have heard about it. Assuming that we need 8 hours to sleep, 16 hours per day remain to not only be offered as a commodity, speaking of the Carpolani Society, as a commodity on the labor market, but also to do unpaid care work, participate in a civic, democratic society, and be able to do self-care, creative work, or simply nothing, to pause. So societies are dependent, as we already heard, on caring times. Let's repolitize them against all odds to thrive for caring societies within those planetary boundaries. Hopefully, this particular temporal perspective will enrich our discussion later on, and I will now hand it over to Fabienne and then to Merle again.
Thank you very much for this very interesting perspective. Dear Hanna, I think it is perfect because I didn't know that Barbara would point to the time, and I also didn't know that Birgit will point to the time, and now you're pointing to time and space and the others before. I think that's really perfect. And so now we have several perspectives, what should change or how it should or could be or shouldn't be. Also, likewise, what Birgit explains to us about right-wing perspectives. And I think Merle will give us insights on the how perhaps to get there or how not to get there, as she is an expert on strategies and has a particular perspective on questions of degrowth. Merle, the floor is yours. Thank you for being here.
Yes, thanks for inviting me. So I'm apologizing if I'm less well prepared than the others. I jumped on this panel very last minute, but I hope I can still contribute maybe some perspectives that are complementary to what has just been said. So as Fabienne just said, I was part of an editorial team that edited a collective volume about degrowth and strategy. And so in this context, we did a lot of thinking about what is a strategy, how do you strategize, and then the other thing that I can maybe contribute is that I am doing a PhD in economics. And so I think I tend to come at things from a sort of materialist Marxist perspective, where I really appreciate what Barbara and Birgit and also to some extent Hanna have been talking about in terms of subjectivities and narratives and the performance of politics also on the right wing. I guess I would contribute to this thinking always that these things are in somehow dialectically related to our life reality, which is structured by, among other things, material aims and material processes, such as capitalism, the capitalist economy. So, okay, so to get started, in our book, the first task was to define what is a strategy. So the definition we gave is, we said it's a thought construct detailing how an actor or a group of actors intends to bring about systemic change towards a desirable end state, given the context that they are embedded in. And then we said, sort of coming from like a mix of like a materialist and a constructivist understanding of how change works, this involves on one hand breaking out of the narratives that justify the systems that we currently use to organize our labor and our time. And I think the previous speakers have already talked at length about this, so I will not talk about it. But it also involves gaining material control over, like, and by this I mean like establishing social institutions and gaining the power to control your own time and to decide what we do collectively with the amount of time that we have that exceeds the amount of time we need to spend on sort of directly reproducing ourselves as human. Like, what do we do with the surplus? And currently these things are not under our control in many ways, right? So they are controlled by patriarchal systems, by capitalist competition, by the capitalist class. And so to gain material control, to change the systems, you must build alliances with others who share your material interests or share your narrative. And also you must identify pressure points in the current system that you can act on to enforce others who are empowered to make change or to build your own new systems. So yeah, and so to design a strategy, basically the idea is you have to be first aware of the context that, and like what is the dynamics that are bringing about the problems that you're fighting. So I think a lot has been said. That was great. I guess coming at it from, as I said, again, an economist perspective, which maybe is a bit reductionist, but I think we must ask, why is care undervalued? Why do we have this lack of control over our time, especially in since the neoliberal era? And I think what I personally find at least convincing analysis is that the idea that we live in low growth capitalist economies, where it has become increasingly challenging for capitalists to accumulate capital. And the reasons for why this is challenging are manifold. I mean, population growth is declining. Also, we have a larger service sector, which is more difficult to automate. And so I think there's the attempt to squeeze as much surplus as you can out of workers, on one hand, by drawing more people into the labor force and reducing the amount of time they have to take care of reproductive work in the unpaid sphere. And people who are in paid care work are oftentimes funded by the public sector, and we keep the funds that are dedicated to them low, because and also when they are employed by private firms, this is work that, as Hanna was saying, is difficult to automate. It's difficult to accelerate. How do you accelerate care? And so instead, in the system, the way to make profit is to reduce the wage paid to these people and to try and increase the amount of stress and the amount of as much as possible to accelerate the work. So I think the question is then, how do we break out of this system where it seems to us, and I think this also feeds maybe into the right-wing narratives that Birgit was talking about, just because from capital's perspective, it is difficult to accumulate and they're squeezing out every job. This creates in people a sense that we are in a scarcity system, that there's not enough for everybody, and there's not enough time, and there's not enough workers, and there's not enough resources. And I think this really feeds into the right-wing narrative that we must protect our own family, we must return. I think a lot of right-wing narratives are indeed, as Birgit was saying, fueled by the sense that, our elderly are rotting away in old folks' home. No one cares anymore, no one loves anymore, and this is all because someone else is taking it away and there's not enough. And I think to challenge this scarcity mindset and get out of this problem that we have care policies in rhetoric but not in practice, we need strategies to materially take control over our time and take control over the surplus that we produce, and to move away from these growth dependent, in the case of Germany, export oriented development models. So how to do it? I mean, in our book, we use a materialist framework from Eric Olin Wright, who says you can combine different types of strategies. And the strategy here is less like a policy proposal. It's more always asking, who is my ally and what action can we do to gain power for ourselves? So one type of strategy is called reform. Basically, it is to say, let's use existing institutions of power, such as parliament or institutions of the state. And you try to build alliances with parts of the powerful class that has an overlapping interest with you. So I'm thinking here an example could be to try and break out of this, I'm coming from the German context here, but this fiscal austerity narrative that I think is really accelerating the scarcity mindset. I think there's a lot of groups within business, for example, rural enterprises, that really struggle right now with the lack of availability of paid care work in rural areas. And this is creating a lot of dissatisfaction. So why are there too few care workers in rural areas? Because it's underpaid. It's difficult to get trained in these positions. And also there's been a lack of planning, a lack of oversight from the state. On one hand, it was promised to people everyone has a Kita-Platz, but on the other hand, no one planned to transition workers into this field. So I think there's some potential strategic alliances that unions representing care workers could enter into with parts of capital to gain control over, let's say, Let's stop the Schwarze Null rhetoric. Let's increase our control over fiscal revenues. Let's increase our control over monetary policy and just spend money on what we want to spend money on, which would be, for example, better paid care work. A second strategy is to say we don't engage in compromise, we engage in confrontation. So this could be anywhere, in the workplace, in politics. I think it's important to realize that I think we need to stop sort of organizing our own decline, like thinking that you can always create win-wins within this low growth capitalist accumulation, I think is a fallacy. So I think for a long time, unions have tried to make compromise, keep wages low, so to facilitate, for example, export orientation. I think what we're seeing now, especially in the US, is actually very promising, an increase in militancy, an increase in strikes. And I think also in Germany, there were strikes in the healthcare sector. And I think a lot of people in society have a lot of compassion for healthcare workers. So I think we can be bold and just demand more of the surplus. We can also demand more of our time, working time reductions that are compensated with full wages, for example. I think there's space to just demand change, no matter whether this is good for capital accumulation or not. And then the third thing is to say, we don't engage in confrontation, but also not in alliances. Instead, we try to create our own spaces outside of the systems of power. So I think here, the care commons or self-organized care communities were already mentioned. I think this is very powerful, especially in combination if we can fight for working time reduction, and if we can fight for sort of more fiscal expenditure on local governments, on investments in social workers, etc. But here the idea is that we cannot rely on the states and we cannot rely on powerful institutions to create for us the ability to control our time and the surplus. Instead, we must design new institutions that we run democratically and that we give time and resources to that, and that we then manage ourselves. So I think maybe, these strategies can be complementary, of course, but the main idea would be to say, what within the current way in which we organize our reproduction as a society is reinforcing these patriarchal and racist and so forth and growth obsessed ideas that squeeze our ability to care and distribute care unequally, and how can we intervene in these institutions and change them so that we can really regain control over how we reproduce ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this interesting thoughts about potential change strategies. I think you linked the thoughts from before pretty good to perspective of potential strange transition or transformation. So without further wanting to talk too much on my own, I would ask the speakers whether they want to say anything about the discussion. If you want to respond or to add anything, you can just raise your hand to let me know. If not, I will talk a little bit further and give you time. If you might think. I don't want to be too pushy. I think we got a pretty good overview how the care crisis arose and what are the big problems. And Barbara now raised her hand, so I will stop talking and I will give the floor to you, Barbara.
Well, thank you for this really inspiring impulses you gave. I have one question, only one question for Merle, which I didn't understand before we start with the discussion. You said that there's a lack of care worker in rural areas, and this is because the working conditions are so bad. I don't believe that. I think it's not the question of a wage or something like that. I think that, for example, elderly expect to have care work for nothing, you know. They want their daughters and daughters-in-law, but they are working. So, and they are not working in the same village, for example. And that's the problem. The idea to get care for love, family care on this base, these times are over. And the problematic of professional care is not only the question of higher amounts and better income. It is more the most thing is the working conditions. And when we have a process that people go out from, leave these jobs, then for the remaining care workers, the conditions get worse. So this is a more problematic thing. Only a question, if I got your argument.
No, thank you so much for bringing that up. I think, I mean, the perspective I gave as like the materialist structuralist analysis is of course simplified, because it was only looking at sort of, you know, capitalism and then capital versus, you know, the rest as like a distinction. But I think I agree with you that there are many lines of exploitation in the current system. And one is, you know, male versus female, older versus young. It is a very complex phenomenon. So I totally agree with you that paying attention to, you know, distributional aspects of who's supposed to care is very important. What I was referring to, and I'm not an expert in this field at all, was rather the child care opportunities. I'm under the impression, but maybe I'm wrong, that this is a problem in several, at least German states, that there was a problem, there was a promise of everyone will have a Kita-Platz that was made, but then this was made in law, but there was not a planning of how to match this with the supply of workers. And I think the reason why there's an undersupply are very complex, but I think my only point was to give an example of where employers might wish to support, or certain parts of capital might wish to support a strategy where we say, let's stop caring so much about, you know, Schwarze Null, all this stuff. Let's just put money and resources into the stuff that we care about. Because I think for a lot of employers who are now relying on having women in their labor force, it is essential that there is paid childcare opportunities. So, so I'm just saying this is like just an example of where sort of this commodification and then pressuring down the care wages is starting to, the snake is starting to bite its own tail, and maybe we can exploit that. But I totally agree with you that it's not the only perspective on the issue, and it's very complicated.
Thank you for the question and the clarification. And then I think first Birgit raised her hand and afterwards Hanna.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe I just can jump into the little discussion the two of you had, and I would very much agree with Merle's materialist approach, and saying, well, of course, we have to look how capitalism works, how capitalism changes, how capitalist accumulation gets into crisis and changes over time. However, I would always say there is no capitalist accumulation without state regulation. So the state is always there, and we always have state institutions which try to regulate capitalist accumulation. Usually in our Western states, they do it in favor of the profit generating capitalist structures. So I think this might be then an argument for your more reformist strategy, saying, well, the state is not only a bureaucracy up there, but for me, in my perspective of the state is always a societal process, and so societal forces can also jump in and try to re-regulate how capitalism works. But as I see it, and I think this was the point you wanted to make, Merle, too, is to say, well, it's part of this the regulation of capitalism is unpaid, low-paid, not acknowledged care. Yeah. So, and then it's difficult to find alliances, but I think within these state institutions, as you pointed out, there is the possibility to find allies in this field, in this state field of regulation. And my second point I wanted to make is this is also what you pointed out with your confrontational strategy there. I was thinking of care strikes, and I don't know who mentioned already care strikes in hospitals in Germany. There was also, I guess, one hospital in Austria where care personnel tried to strike in hospitals for better working conditions, for better wages, and so on. But there is also another form of care strike which puts more the care for oneself into the center. And this is the tradition in Latin America, in Southern Europe, especially in Spain and in Italy, where women's groups, they say, well, we have to go on strike, but it does not only mean to refuse to give care, but to take care for oneself. So to take time and space to care for ourselves, for nonviolent surroundings, for better living. And I think this could be an interesting strategy to look at. And I know that there are, of course, groups in Austria, also in Germany, and as I said, in Southern European countries to develop this care strike. And I think this would also be a way to combine our joint thought of time, because strike means we just hold on time and we create let's say, another time bubble where we can take care of ourselves and, of course, of others, and develop new ideas towards how we could get towards a caring society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hanna.
Thank you for this inspiring beginning of our discussion. And I just want to add another point to this idea of are carers like lacking in rural areas, and what could be probably reasons for that. Just on an anecdotal base, my aunts are engaged in the nursery sector in Switzerland. And I don't know if you're familiar with the region of Degrwth, a very wealth area of Switzerland. And there they are building a care center for elderlies. And they are like really busy looking for staff members, and they can't afford them like housing that they can afford to live in, to take care of the wealthier elderlies living in the region of Degrwth. So what I'm saying is maybe this could be a reminder for us in our discussion of the temporal and spatial embeddedness of those caring times and those caring needs. So what I'm saying with temporal and spatial is especially that. So spatial means housing politics, and temporal in this particular case could mean like, what are the infrastructures that we use on a daily basis to commute from our homes to our workplace? So is there any financial alliance that we could look for to improve those caring infrastructures on a temporal and spatial basis? So, and I think from that point of view, it's not only a problem or an issue of the more rural areas, but also if we look at gentrification phenomena in more urban contexts, we do see that that is a problem too. So yeah, when we then look at the public transport sector and mobility patterns, we do see that those who care on an everyday basis, they are more dependent on, for example, public infrastructures, public transport. And they do a lot of trip changing. So they do have a lot on their table when they start from A to B. And it's not only commuting from their homes to their workplace and then in the evening back home again. And this is not something that I found out. That is a known fact for decades. But they have several stops in between due to their care responsibilities. So maybe that could be an example for like how to widen those alliances that Merle pointed out to, and to decide to put money, like financial power, onto those caring structures in order to thrive towards those caring societies. And I think that could be something, I mean, there are a lot of arguments in there, demographic changes and so on and so forth, but I think there could be like a political interface that could be useful for the debate.
So we have like a broad topic with a lot of insights, and Merle wants to respond, so I will give the floor to you.
Well, I had a question for I guess mostly Birgit Sauer, but I'm also interested in hearing Barbara and Hanna's perspectives, of course. So I was wondering how you see this, the relation sort of between, you know, maybe this very simplified materialist vision that I sketched of like challenges of accumulation leading to ever greater efforts to exploit either, you know, fiscal resources or the time of people, and this resurgence of the right wing like traditional family structure, and also how you see sort of navigating the need to sort of address people in their lived realities, and the lived reality is this stress, anxiety, I don't feel loved, people are not caring for anyone anymore. How do we address people there, but then pull them back onto this level of, you know, okay, so let's think about how we can create more space for care, without falling, I guess, into the trap of validating the racist and the patriarchal language that is in these narratives. Because, I mean, as Barbara said, this is not just an issue of how can we create more time for care and democratically decide, you know, what we want to allocate time and resources to. It is also a distributional issue of who is supposed to care, because I think we can assume that even in a, you know, communist society or whatever, people who are over specialized in care are always in a position where you might be exploited more than others, right? Because you're always in these dependency relations. So yes, I'm interested in hearing what you think is like, how do you explain the resurgence of this right-wing thinking now? And how do we counter it effectively? Because it is scary to see like the group of people buying into this growing and growing.
Birgit, do you want to yeah.
I could just start, but I do not have final answers or final solutions. But I think what we could see is that the neoliberal domination of the market over all societal spheres in the last 30 years was leading to insecurity, to precarization of the everyday life of people. And this was on the labor market as well as in families. And I wanted to say these developments are very contradictory because they include precarity of work, fear of losing the job, to, let's say, migrant, be it right or not, but also now with inflation, fear of losing, for instance, housing. So there is quite a lot of insecurity. And I would not say that this insecurity straightforward leads to right-wing identification or to the decision to vote for the right. But what I think is that the right-wingers, they took up these insecurities and these precarization processes. So they labeled themselves in Germany die Kümmererpartei, so the parties of those who care for people, because they just found that the traditional or mainstream parties do not have any sense of how these neoliberal restructurings had these fatal, destroying impacts on the everyday life. So I think to counter these right-wing move, and I would say, well, this is really scary. I think we need, more of social policies again. And it was, of course, these mainstream parties that were part of deconstructing the welfare state. So as far as I know, I'm familiar with the German case and with the Austrian case. So in Germany, it was clear that it was the Social Democratic Party introducing Hartz IV laws, for instance, and disrupting the welfare state. So why should then people vote for social democrats anymore or believe them? I think so. This is the background for, or this is what these contradictions built the background for the rise of the authoritarian right, and they exploit these contradictions, and they have one very simple narrative. Either it's the migrants or it's this crisis of masculinity. They do not question it, but they have this solution or this alleged solution. So, but I think to counter this, we have to go back to social policy, which shouldn't be the old welfare state, because we all know this excluded women from the beginning, but we have to look into this more. How could we reconstruct social welfare, what we discussed today, with more social infrastructure? For instance, this is the idea of supply of public transport, of education, of kindergartens, of healthcare, of elderly care. So I think the state should, or states should invest in this. And then the second point, which I would also make, is that we have to look at these contradictory emotions and effects which came with neoliberalism. And this was, of course, being afraid of losing the job, being shameful of losing the job, for instance. So it is a really strange and I think also dangerous mixture of emotion which developed during neoliberalism, also competitiveness, egocentric, which is also combined, I think Engin Isin called this neuroticism. Yeah, it's a neurotic subject, which is which is narcissist, but which is also permanently afraid. And this is why I think that affect and emotion are important embodied elements of the everyday life, And democratic politics should be aware of this and should also create spaces and time to deal with these effects. And the right-wingers, they do it. They just do it. They were aware and saying, well, we pick up your fears. We help you, we rescue you. Of course, addressing white males, but yeah. And then promising traditional gender roles and traditional forms of belonging. So be it the family, be it the nation state or the nation. Okay, I stop here.
Thank you, Birgit. And Barbara also wanted to respond, I think. Your mic is still off. You have to turn it on. Now we can hear you.
Well, Birgit, on the one hand side, you are right, of course. But the funny point is that the right-wing parties seems to give answers. But of course, when you read their program, it's absolutely neoliberal, and they want to stop social aid, they want to stop the welfare state, and so on. So that all these disoriented people and people with needs, they wouldn't get happy with the right-wing party when they come to the government. So this is a contrary point. We should give more information about that. But what I want to point out is that the modernization of modern societies, of course, brought up more possibilities, more emancipation possibilities for women, for example. And this was one of the starting point of care crisis, because we don't have care for free for men in families, and to think, and it's also for women problematic, not only for men to think of restoring patriarchy, but also for women to say, well, I should do everything, like the top girls we discussed. And so they had the idea that the treadwives is now a new phenomenon in social media, yeah, and to give tips for cleaning houses and so on, and to think about a new order. So my idea of caring communities would offer a possibility that there is somebody who cares for me, and there is a possibility to participate and to decide with others what is their what are the efforts here in our local region, and how can we solve the problems in a democratic way. And the thing is that when care is not automatically there because of women emancipation, then men are confronted with their relatedness and with their contingent side. So this is the idea, to get them into contact with men who have another idea of masculinity, like caring masculinity and a more non-hegemonial way of being men, that they can go into contact and they make other experiences which are important, I think. So care should also be an idea that men should do, and they realize that this is an important issue of their life, which makes their life more complete. And what we see is that it's more expensive to have this problematic of care lacks than to think about how can we establish caring communities which are not based on traditional roles and efforts, and which also combine the professional, the informal, and the private aspects of care. Yeah.
Thank you very much for further broadening all the perspectives. I would now suggest to open the floor also for questions for the audience. So please raise your hand and I will tell you if you should talk or are allowed to talk. Yes, thank you very much. At first, I think we will leave a little time to the audience to think about their questions, because we know we needed that too after the impulses. I think we had like a broad perspective where we agreed on time as pretty important. We agreed on neoliberalism, or Merle pointed out capitalism, even more radical from a Marxist materialist perspective, as one of the contexts in which care crisis arose or arise, and how care lacks came up. I think we agreed that it needs time, space, and institutions for a caring society. There are differences in what we think should be the focus in changing societies, but we also changing towards caring society, but we also agreed like there might be different forms how to change the confrontation, own spaces like community care, which Barbara pointed out now at the end. We talked about the strikes, and we also talked about alliances in the systematic perspective on strategies Merle pointed out to us. And now Corinna had the time to think about a question. Please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks a lot, everyone, for your inputs. I think it was really interesting, and I especially also liked that times and temporalities was such a cross-cutting theme in all your interventions, and would hope that we have more time to talk about those later. But I had a different question first. So I was wondering, inspired basically by Merle's definition of strategy, I cannot, I didn't write it down perfectly, unfortunately, but I think you said something that it's a way towards a wishful end state starting from the state we're currently at. So when we're now thinking about strategies towards a caring society or caring societies, we start from where we're at right now. And I think we started from that by pointing out the care crisis, about paid care work being overburdened and underpaid. But at the same time, one point that I was missing and that I would really like to hear how in such a transformation, or what are the strategies that we have with care migration. Like, for example, here in Austria, the data from the Chamber of Commerce came out, I think, 2 months ago, saying that of the 24-hour nurses here, 98% don't have Austrian citizenship. More than 50% of those are from Romania, whose accession to the Schengen zone Austria is currently blocking. So there's a lot of perversion and intersectional inequalities in this right now. And what strategies can we formulate for this specific sphere of care migration to move to a caring society or caring societies? And it's not directed to anyone in specific, so whoever feels that they want.
Yeah, does anybody feel the urge to answer. And afterwards, I saw that Adelheid Giesecker rose her hand. But first, we'll answer this question. And afterwards, I will get back to you. So Merle, you want to answer? Or give your thoughts?
I could make a start, and then I think the others will probably have a lot of great things to contribute from a more like care researcher perspective. But yeah, thank you, Corinna, for raising this point, because I think it's really impossible to talk about care or to talk about strategies surrounding care without talking about migration. And I think it's actually a really difficult issue for left-wing parties. And I feel like a lot of people are kind of afraid to deal with it head on, even though it is so central. And I think maybe it's partly because people are maybe afraid to upset people who are currently leaning towards the right, who believe this idea that, you know, we need like homogeneous society to have support for the welfare state, and this idea of the nation is becoming more prominent in discussions and stuff. But I think, I mean, the current society, like the current capitalist development model in Germany with export orientation, sort of relies on keeping wages in care work low. And of course, one way to do that is to bring in migrants and then not give them rights to fight for higher wages, same as other people. I think that saying that the answer to this is to restrict migration is the completely wrong approach. I think migration is something that cannot be controlled by, you know, walling yourself off. I think this is the wrong idea. And I think, in fact, the idea that you can have a sort of strategy to escape capitalism as one nation state is completely wrong. So I think for any sort of thing that we are talking about, we need to consider what is the geopolitical dimension of what we are proposing, and what sort of alliances with people in other countries who are sort of in similar positions as us can we engage in to make these things happen. So I would say, for me, again, the strategy would have to start from analyzing, you know, the system as a whole. So I mean, Birgit said, like, of course, the state is regulating capitalism. I totally agree with this, but I mean, it is also kind of crazy that we just had like a green left and neoliberal coalition in Germany that, when it comes to like just transition and green jobs, did not categorize care jobs as green jobs and only focused on giving more fiscal expenditures to high-tech sectors in order to bolster German position in the export market. And I think this shows, I mean, you can say they are sellouts, but I think it also shows that there is sort of a belief within the state that in order to be able to do care as a nice thing, we need to first defend our export orientation and our geopolitical position in the global market. And I think if we want to prioritize care, this is not a viable development model. So I think we need to, you know, have a sort of international politics that allows us to be okay with reducing our export orientation and to have more sort of demand internally. And then I think at the same time to sort of from the bottom up support like wages, good wages and good working conditions in care work. I think in terms of alliances, we have to make alliances between care workers and migrant rights organizations, because I think the way to protect your wages as a care worker with migration is to give migrants the same rights that you have to strike and the same rights to access social welfare and these things. So I think, if that makes sense, like we need a sort of like internationalist outlook on both levels, on like our macro development strategy of capitalism and also in terms of our like, you know, strategies as workers. So, but yeah, I think it's a difficult issue and I think it's fraught with a lot of contradictions, unfortunately.
Thank you. And I think Barbara had raised her hand. Do you want to say? Or?
Yeah, well, there's a lot to say to care migration, I think, but I thought that Adelheid Giesecker would like to say something. Well, I think like Merle, we need care migration, of course. That's not the question, but they are not victims. They want to come, but they have to have civil rights. They have to have the right to go to trade unions and so on. So I think the working conditions should be better. But I also think that Brigitte Auenbacher has to say much about that. But we also have to think about the living conditions of the people they leave when they come to us to do the care work. And this is also a responsibility we have to think about. So this is the only thing I want to say that.
Thank you for adding. Then Hanna and afterwards Birgit raised their hands.
Yeah, just briefly, also another thought on that. Talking of right-wing populism, this argument or this dangerous combination of women's rights movements and right-wing populism, also called femo-nationalism, as Sarah Ferris called it once. So this idea that there should be the right female migrant that might save us here, planning out global care chains. So I think this could also be like a threat when it comes to this idea of like care migration and how that might be a solution. And of course we do need it, and I would totally agree that precarity or the right working conditions and also the right to participate on the civic and political level are more than important to do that. And instead, maybe another branch could be like to think of, and then I'm like heading back to the beginning of our discussion, like how could we onshore instead of offshore the ability, the temporal and spatial ability to care, to have the right to care. So that is something, I mean, rather on a long term or midterm. And then, yeah, for my topic, that is something when it comes to time politics, for example, you might be familiar with the debate of the 4-day working week. And sometimes I wonder where this fifth day in the week would go to. So as we do know that capitalism always finds like the cheapest labor, the most precarious way to arrange unpaid or paid labor. I wonder where this fifth day, if our society would agree to only work wage-wise on 4 days, where the work of the fifth day in the week would go to. So this is something like talking of migration and femo-nationalism, those are thoughts that came to my mind. I'm gonna hand it over to Birgit.
Yeah, but I wanted first to ask Adelheid Biesecker if she wants to jump in, because she raised her hand before me. If she wants to jump in on this issue of care migration, then I can wait. I'm happy to wait.
You have to put on your mic, Adelheid.
It's okay now?
Yes, we can
Okay.
hear you. Thank
My
you.
problem with care migration is that it's a sort of externalization, our problems to other societies. What Barbara said, they leave their children there, and so on and so on. So we are externalizing. I don't want a society only with one nation, no. But migration has to be organized from another motivation. If we want to organize a good life for them, they shall come, yes, but not in this way. The problem is that capitalism always needs the division between the paid and unpaid sphere. We know it. And nature and unpaid labor are outside the economic sphere. And now from labor and from female labor and from care labor and from nature, they take some elements to create markets. Polanyi has made clear that the commodification of nature and labor means to destruct labor and nature. The solution with markets cannot help for transformation towards a caring society. So that's the problem. And what Barbara says, we need another solution. We need a solution where we can overcome this division. And the problem is capitalism has no feeling for reproduction. They have markets, and as long as they have markets, they can buy, and they don't want to give us a lot of money, yes, but they need markets, and all things outside the market has no value. And for us, it's necessary to have to transform towards an economy with all these spheres together. So, and that's why I think we have to speak not only about the care crisis, but a socio-ecological crisis. But it's the same structure and the same problem. And the climate crisis had the same roots as the care crisis. Only two other things to mention for the German political situation. My problem is that I think the Social Democratic Party loses her basis, the industrial worker, and they are not capable of finding a new basis. And I think in some years we have no Social Democratic Party, one thing. And the other thing, and I think not only for Germany, is the question of distribution. The distribution is more unequal than ever. And people know this, and they see how our politicians help the rich people to live. Yes, and that's also a basis for the right-wing development. And no political person discusses this big problem. And if we are not capable of solving this problem, I think we will have a situation where the right-wing party will be stronger and stronger and stronger. So,
thank you. Birgit?
Yeah, unfortunately, Adelheid, I have to agree with you. I think it's really fascism unto portas, and it's not only the Social Democratic Party in Germany. In Austria, it's rather similar. So they are, well, UK might be different at the moment, but I think you're totally right. But there is also hope. If you look, for instance, to Austria, there is a revival of the Communist Party.
yes,
And what they
okay.
do, I would say they are social democrats. So those who win, those communists who win in Austria, they have social democratic programs. But I would say maybe there is still hope in this direction, but it's very small. And I also agree with you to say, well, there is this pattern of capitalism to externalize all reproduction, to naturalize, externalize, be it care, be it the environment, be it colonialism. It's always the same pattern, and that we have to, in the long run, cut this pattern, because we only have this one planet, and the exploitation of people leads to inequality, and this inequality leads to despair, and then again to a more fascist conjuncture. But I would also like to come back to this issue of care migration. And I would say, I would also agree with Adelheid that this is a classical form of externalization, of colonial exploitation. However, I think there is also people organizing, and this is the case for Switzerland, where 24-hour caretakers organized and were fighting for their rights. There is an organization here in Austria where 24-hour care workers organized to push through their rights. So I think this is a way not only not to immediately overcome this capitalist externalization and exploitation, but it's a way to show that it doesn't work on smoothly on this capitalist route. And I myself, I'm in the position that I'm living in Vienna. I have a nearly 90-year-old mother in the south of Germany. So what should I do? And whenever I talk to people here who organize, who are involved in organized 24-hour care workers, I say, you have to also organize people like me. And I'm happy to get organized. And I think this could also be a sort of alliance to not only organize the workers, but also those who are in need of care. And this is mainly the daughters, as we had it at the beginning, or the daughters-in-law. So I think there might be a huge potential in organizing in favor of these care migrants. Thanks.
Thank you for this interesting contribution and thoughts. I think it was really fruitful on this question on care migration. I wasn't quite sure whether Adelheid had a question too, or whether you wanted to add. I thought at first you only had a question. That was why I wasn't picking you up. But it wasn't a question. You wanted to contribute. Okay. So then Theo Papadopoulos raised his hand. The floor is yours.
Hi, yes, I hope you can hear me. Thank you very much. This is absolutely fascinating discussion. I just wanted to raise two issues and share my thoughts on them. One is the idea of care, which so far in the discussion has been concentrated mostly within what I will call the household realm, right? So it's care about children or care about elderly parents, etc. But we are also responsible, I think, if we are going to move to a caring society and a caring economy, we are responsible also for caring about each other more broadly, for caring about the environment, our communities, etc. Which means that then the demand for this extra time that somebody mentioned earlier can be easily, how can I put it, put together as the demand for what I will call, what I say to the students sometimes, is the demand for civic time. We want time to care for each other and to care for our communities and to care for our polis, yeah, for our political communities. So as the welfare state withdraws, as the market takes precedent, and we are now given often as part of neoliberalism more responsibilities for ourselves and everything around us, then I think the time has come to demand something that is an organization of time that includes civic time. So it's not only private time and work time, it's time for us to, and I think that's a, in my view, it could behave as an idea, some mileage with a lot of people. You know, we might not ask for more money, but we ask for more time to care for each other. All right, that's my first point. And the second one is about, I mean, I personally write a lot and have thought about the conceptualizations of a family as what I call a collective actor, right? The family as a collective actor. And I'm thinking about more in analytical terms. Very often we think about the family in terms of patriarchal families or households where the gender dynamics and the gender power asymmetries are played out. But I was trying to think about ways in which we can think about the family as another institution in civil society that can be a democratic family, a different type of family that trains people to care for each other from an early age, and perhaps we can start kind of taking back this concept of the family that the right seems now, the far right especially, seems to have a lot of traction with the populace, and take that back and provide a new understanding that we can have families, but they can be different from the traditional patriarchal families. Yeah, they're more democratic, they're more open to the rest of society, they can be combined, they can together as a family go and work for our communities in this extra day that somebody mentioned. So I was wondering if you would like to kind of comment, or perhaps consider if these ideas are interesting. Right, thank you very much.
Thank you for the question or the comment. Hanna, you raised your hand, so you want to respond. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe to the first argument of Theo Papadopoulos. So the idea, how can we combine the findings and the analysis of social reproduction onto ecological reproduction, if I get you right. And I think when it comes to those temporal needs and those idea that we can delegate real needs into, let's say the digital sphere, one ecological aspect could be to look at the things and the use of a territory when it comes to those huge servers that are needed in order to provide us with the ability to do those nice video conferences and the CO2 emissions it entails. And this brings me back to the brief presentation of Barbara Adam I gave when it comes to timescapes. So even though we have a quick win within this paradigmatic of fastness, so we can connect, and it has definitely some participatory civic advantages, there is an ecological cost for it, so to say. So there are real material CO2 emissions on in a specific time and space emigrated. And I think that is important. Maybe you are familiar with the concept of slow violence also. So how can we link this idea that it's not only the present that matters, and we can't delegate everything to the future, that's another thing, but also to have an idea of this interconnection, this temporal and spatial interconnection of past, present, and future, especially when it comes to those exploration and externalization of ecological costs for the current living standard. So I think that might be some responses to the first point that you raised, or another fruits of thought.
Thank you, Hanna.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Birgit also rose her hand.
Yeah. Thank you, Theo, for your insight. And I think I love this idea of civic time, because I think this is really important. And this is also when Hanna, she mentioned Frigga Haug. So her 4-in-1 idea is that you should have time for civic engagement or for participation. And I think this is really important. And of course, this would need institutions or institutionalized ways of civic time. And it would need specific spaces. But I think this is really important to democratize liberal democracies. Otherwise, they will not work in the future. So I really like that. I also somehow like the idea to democratize families. I'm not sure if we should keep the concept of family. Maybe we could call it caring communities. Maybe I would prefer that. But I totally agree that And I think this is the idea that we have to start democratization at the level of the everyday, of how people live together, how they care for their children, for their partners, for themselves, and how they live. So this is then the space and the mode where we should start with democratization. So in this sense, I would also agree with you saying, well, let's label it family, or let's label it caring community, where this way of a sort of caring democratization should start. Thanks.
Thank you, Birgit. Before I hand over to Barbara, I want to suggest that we would only have time for one other questions from the audience, but only a quick one if anybody has one. You have to raise your hand now. If not, we will close the session pretty soon because like we are running out of time, although it is a pretty interesting discussion. So Barbara, now the floor is yours again.
Well, I would like to respond to Theo and also Birgit. I think we are still in the process that the family life is democratizing because the rights for women and the rights for children had been getting better and better, I think, and the problematization of violence, for example, through the feminist movements and the queer movements brought up new ideas, what is in the black box family, so that we have different genders and sexualities. But I don't want to give up the idea of family because it's linked with special emotions and special relationships which are different than I have a relationship with my neighbors. So I think it's good to have an expression for that, but we still have to improve the rights and the positions of the vulnerable family members. I think this is important to go in this direction. And in Germany, we have this idea of the to get better law for very different kinds of familial structures. So perhaps this is the direction. Well, the time for the civic engagement, I think, could be a good idea with this option time model and the idea of breathing life courses. My problem with Frigga Haug is that we have this 4 hour this, 4 hour this, 4 hour this, but I want to do a dissertation, for example, or an art project or whatever, and I need 12, 16 hours a day for that, and I want to do this. So, but then we have another, there's another time in my life where I want to do a political engagement or something like that, and for that I have the option to get the time. The interesting thing is when you are member of a fire service in Germany, then there's a fire and you do it. It's not your job. It's a volunteering thing in the fire service in your village. Then you have to, you can leave your working place and you can go there, and you are not allowed by law that the employer is not allowed by law to give problems to you for this engagement. So there's a wonderful regulation for civics and volunteering thing, and we should broader this idea and these rights. So there's still a structure for that, and perhaps we can bring it also for engagement by Fridays for Future or something like that. Okay.
Hanna?
Yeah, just quickly, because that's a common mistake and I can't leave it like that. Frigga Haug makes it like really explicit that she doesn't mean like 4 in 1 perspective, like harshly, you have 4 hours for that and 4 hours for that. It's rather an interwoven, connective and dynamic. And so that to say, and maybe to give you an outlook, I'm currently working on a feminist version of the option time model of Jurczyk and Bückenberger together with Karin Jurczyk. So be informed that there will be more feminist content, since the option time model is only focusing on the employer perspective. And that is something that Biseka and Bayer differentiated years ago, that there are some time politics that do focus on like how can we reconcile temporal needs around the paradigm of paid labor. But there are other time politic concepts that arrange or choose a different focus. So those are the 3 things, just as a quick reaction to what Barbara just said.
Thank you for the outlook.
Great.
Also to
Wonderful.
new ideas. Yeah, I think so. We are all looking forward to read about it, I think. If any of the speakers just wants to add maximum 2 sentences at the ending, we can do a last round. But if you are fine, it's fine for me too. Okay, Birgit is nodding. Nobody is raising their hand. So thank you very much. It was really such an interesting discussion. It's 8 o'clock and I'm still pretty awake because it was so interesting and so fruitful, I think. And I'm really happy that we had all the speakers here, and I'm really thankful. My colleague Corinna already posted the info on the upcoming events into the chat. So if you are interested to join the further discussions, you can have a look at our homepage, or as Corinna noted, it's on the 8th of December. And then myself, Corinna Dengler, and Attila Milik will discuss about decent care for all within planetary boundaries. And I think we will also discuss a little bit more about the question of migration. And on the 22nd, we will discuss transformative change in changing societies with Roland Atzmüller, Kim A. Flügge, Christa Wichterich, and Andrea Vetter. So thank you very much. We are pretty sharp in the time, I see, even 4 minutes early. And I hope to see you all again. Thank you very much. And we will post the session online, as we said before.